Welcome to Reading Bear. Today we've got a story where OP's new boss decides to save money by cutting what he thinks is dead weight, meaning OP. I used to think my job wasn't anything special. I was just the quiet person behind a stack of dashboards and a mess of spreadsheets, the one who always picked up the after-hours calls when something blinked red. If an account manager promised a client the moon, I figured out a way to build a ladder high enough to at least get us close. If a client's auditor showed up and asked for proof, I knew where it lived and what format would make them nod. The job title changed a couple times, but the work stayed the same. Keep the big customers calm, keep the system reliable, keep the paperwork clean, and keep the money coming. It didn't look impressive from the outside. I wasn't the person on stage when we closed a deal. I wasn't on the website. I didn't have a corner office. I had a beat-up laptop, a phone that never really stopped buzzing, and a habit of leaving sticky notes under my keyboard with obscure port numbers and renewal dates. I worked with 3 enterprise clients that covered most of my salary several times over. If you added their contracts together with the expansion projects they leaned on me to shepherd, the annual value sat right around a number I tried not to think about. Because I got anxious, imagining how fast one stupid mistake could burn it down. They stayed because I knew their weirdness. Every system has weirdness. You don't learn it from a glossy pitch deck. You learn it at 2 a.m. when the alert says something's failing, and a sleepy security engineer whispers that the change control form is missing, a checkbox no one has clicked since a past employee left. That was my world. Not glamorous, not simple, but stable until we hired a new boss who thought the quickest way to look smart was to shave costs. The first time I met him, he stared at my badge and said he couldn't figure out what technical account operations meant. I told him it meant I made sure the accounts that paid for everyone's snacks didn't churn. He said that sounded like project management, and he already had people for that. I said it wasn't project management as much as it was, if we mess this up, the client pulls a clause and we refund 6 figures. He smiled like I'd told a joke. He liked simple charts with green arrows going up. He started sending emails about run rate and margin discipline. He asked for a spreadsheet showing people and salaries and asked a lot of questions about overtime. I explained that our after-hours coverage wasn't technically overtime. It was part of my on-call rotation. He wrote, "On-call stipend" in the margin and drew a big circle around it. A week later, he called me into a glass room. HR was already there with a sealed envelope. He gestured at the chair like a flight attendant, pointing to an exit. "We're restructuring," he said. "Your role overlaps with other functions. I need to reduce run rate by 50. Your position is being eliminated, effective immediately." I asked if there was a transition plan. He shook his head. "We can't afford a transition," he said. "You'll do a clean handover today, return all property, and stop contacting clients immediately. HR has your separation agreement. We're not doing a consulting arrangement. No back and forth, no soft landing. Clear?" I looked at HR. HR stared at the table like the wood grain had the answer to everything. I asked if he wanted me to put together the usual tribal knowledge doc. We all know that file, the one you write for the person after you, because the wiki page tells them how to log in, but not where to step lightly. "No," he said. "Use the offboarding checklist. That's what it's for. Keep it businesslike." He slid the envelope to me and tapped the top sheet. There, in neat language, was everything he'd just said. Terminated today. No client contact. No systems access after asset return. No transition support. NDA remains in force. Non-solicit in place. And a polite sentence that said I was expected to comply with instructions from management and HR. I don't have a dramatic comeback for that moment. I wasn't going to flip a desk or offer a moral speech. I read every line, because I always read. Then I nodded. If he wanted everything by the book, then by the book it would be. I signed what HR put in front of me. HR asked if I wanted to take a moment. I said I was okay. I asked the boss to confirm verbally that I was not to contact any clients or vendors, and that there would be no consulting or transition assistance. He said, "Correct." Then I asked HR to confirm it in writing. HR pointed to the lines again. I asked them both to initial the offboarding instruction sheet, not because I expected a fight later, but because I have a habit of living with receipts. Then I went to my desk, opened the official offboarding checklist, and followed it like scripture. The checklist was basic. Revoke API keys. Transfer cloud account ownership to the shared admin group. Export last week's reports to the shared drive. Make a list of open tickets. Write down passwords in the vault if they weren't already there. They were. Turn in badge and laptop. Wipe personal data. Remove my phone number from the on-call schedule. Sign the line that said I returned the hardware token. It didn't ask for stories. It didn't ask for why the maintenance window for one client always had to start an hour earlier than they thought, because a tiny batch job on their side woke up at a weird time and fought us for locks. The checklist didn't ask for the quirk where you needed to restart a specific service twice to clear an old bug no one had time to fix. It didn't ask for the special folder where the audit evidence pack lived, the one I had curated with date-stamped PDFs, links to logs, and those dumb screenshots that auditors love because it makes the report feel solid. The checklist didn't care that one of our clients would only roll changes if they heard my voice say, "We're green," because they had a long memory for outages. The checklist asked for boxes. I checked them. When I got to the item that said Update Client Contact Lists, I opened the shared doc, replaced my name with Support at Company, and removed my personal mobile. For years, I'd let clients call me when something exploded because it was faster and because I could usually fix it before it got political. But the instruction was clear. Stop contacting clients immediately. The agreement repeated it. I didn't argue. I removed myself completely. A coworker popped their head over the partition. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," I said. It was true in the way you're fine when a door closes and you can't hear anything yet. I dropped my laptop and badge with HR. HR gave me a cardboard box with a plant I forgot I owned and a coffee mug someone else had left behind months ago. The boss gave me a nod like we'd completed an audit. I walked out. I didn't blast them on social media. I didn't write a dramatic email. I went home, made a cheap sandwich, and messaged my wife that I would be interrupting her show with job searches on the TV for a bit. She said we'd be okay. She was right. I updated my profile and answered a couple messages I'd ignored because I wasn't looking. Then I turned off my work phone for the first time in years. The first ping came 2 days later. It was a text to my personal number, which the client shouldn't have had anymore because I'd scrubbed it, but people keep numbers. The message said they were seeing errors in a job we ran for them every weekend. I ignored it. Not because I wanted to be cruel, but because the piece of paper I signed said I should. 5 minutes later, my personal email chimed with a message from an account manager. "Super urgent. Can you hop on a call?" I didn't reply. Then came a call from an unknown number. I let it ring. After it stopped, I got an email from HR. Reminder, do not engage with clients. Redirect all inquiries to support. I sent HR a one-line reply. Acknowledged. That was my malicious compliance moment, if you want to put a title on it. They wanted strict rules. I followed them strictly. That weekend, while my wife and I were trying to pretend we weren't thinking about money, a friend from the company texted from their personal phone. They said the new boss had insisted they winterize the on-call process by rotating it to a different team that didn't know my clients. He didn't want to pay a stipend. He declared that our clients should use the queue like everyone else. The queue was fine for regular tickets. It wasn't fine for a batch job that needed a manual fix during a 5-minute window, or it would lock and fail for hours. Sunday night, the friend wrote, "They missed the window. Client system got into a deadlock. Now a third party can't post updates. They had to roll back. Boss is mad." He asked why process wasn't documented. People keep sending him screenshots of the checklist. I had documented the process. I documented everything the checklist asked for. It just didn't ask for the key sentence. "If this job fails, you must kill the orphaned worker on the secondary node before rerunning, or it will hang." That sentence lived in my head, and in an old comment thread, I'd bookmarked in a personal browser. I never wrote it down formally because the plan was to replace the job with a newer system. We kept pushing the upgrade because the old job worked when someone who knew the dance held its hand. That someone used to be me. On Monday, a client success manager messaged me on a social platform to say he hoped I was doing okay, and to ask, in a general way, if I'd be open to informal advice. I thanked him for the kind words and told him I couldn't consult or advise because my former employer had made it clear there would be no transition support, and I was respecting that. He reacted with a thumbs up and didn't push. The next week, my old team had a scheduled quarterly business review with our biggest client. I used to prep those for days, metrics about uptime, how incidents were resolved, planned roadmap items translated into business language, and a few slides about value. Nothing flashy, just enough to show that we weren't asleep at the wheel. I got a message from a former colleague after that meeting. They showed up with a recycled deck. The client asked why the audit evidence wasn't in the shared location. Boss said he thought it lived in a system that everyone could access. Client asked for the list of upcoming change windows. No one had it. Renewal is in X months. Boss left looking pale. I had kept the audit evidence in a folder I updated after every change. The folder didn't live in the generic compliance team space because no one maintained it properly. It lived in a corner of the shared drive with a naming convention that made sense to exactly one person, me. I told myself I should move it someday. I never did, because moving it meant teaching people how to keep it right, and there was always a priority above it. Another ping. They tried to run your maintenance script to pre-rotate logs before the auditor pulled them. It half worked, and they thought it completed. Auditor got grumpy when the timestamp gap looked suspicious. Boss blamed storage. Then came the call I didn't answer but couldn't stop looking at as it lit up my screen. It was the direct line from a data center manager at one of our clients. He only called when something had the potential to turn into a credits situation. Credits are those lovely clauses where you don't pay us for a month if we drop below a line. He hung up. I stared at the ceiling for a while and told myself to stop caring. I almost called him back and then remembered a line in a document that had my initials next to it. I got a job offer from a company that did similar work but in a calmer way. The pay wasn't flashy, but the leadership didn't talk about run rate on their third sentence. They asked me questions about failure modes. I liked that. I accepted. I told my wife we would be okay. Then I decided to take a day and go for a long walk in a park I used to drive past but never enter because there was always another call. While I was out, a former account manager sent me a message that started with a joke and ended with, "Please tell me you have the evidence pack." I replied with a neutral note that I didn't retain any company data and reminded them that I was not permitted to provide transition support. I felt like a robot writing it, but I knew where the line was. He later wrote, "Boss told client we can pass the audit without you. Client asked for proof we could not provide. They invoked the thing where they can suspend new orders pending remediation. Expansion project put on ice." He put a sad face. Suspending new orders doesn't sound like much until you realize those orders were basically the last quarter's green arrow. Paused. Just like that. At my new job, my first week was all orientation and meeting people. I kept my head down. I did not mention where I had been or what was happening. I did my paperwork and tried to learn how they named their servers. It felt strange to end the day and not have my phone vibrate on the nightstand like it had a heartbeat. Then the next domino tipped. A friend who handled billing at my old place sent me a message from a personal account I didn't recognize at first. It said, "Client A's renewal is stuck." Procurement asked for the name of the designated technical contact and the continuity plan. Boss gave them a new account manager and a link to our public status page. Procurement laughed. They want the person who signs off on changes and the person who stands on the bridge during incidents. Your name is on their vendor file. It's a required field. The boss had assumed that titles were interchangeable. The contract didn't care about titles. It named roles and the responsibilities those roles had to cover. In the annex, you could find my name as the designated escalation contact. There was a line about replacements requiring written approval after a 90-day overlap period, or an exception plan. An exception plan wasn't just a memo. It required tests. The client hadn't approved any of that because our side never sent it. Hard to send when the person you ask to write it is outside the building with a cardboard box and a plant. Another message. Client B's risk committee flagged us because the person managing their encryption key rotation left. Boss said security owns it. Security said you owned the runbook with client-specific timing. Committee says no renewal until we demonstrate a successful rotation and evidence of separation of duties. Boss asked what that meant. People opened Slack channels and started tagging ghosts. I wasn't there to mediate between teams anymore. When I'd been in the building, I would translate. I'd sit in security's area and ask what proof would make them happy. Then I'd sit with engineering and explain how the proof needed to look so an auditor wouldn't get lost. Then I'd sit with the client and explain it again without acronyms. That middle layer doesn't look like work to a spreadsheet person. It's not a widget you can count. But when it's gone, everyone suddenly starts sending long emails at each other. And deadlines pass while people debate what the word evidence means. I didn't want them to fail, even after how they handled me. I genuinely didn't. I wanted them to realize you cannot cut institutional knowledge with a box cutter and expect the patient to get up and jog. But wanting something and interfering are different things. The rules said don't interfere. So I stayed quiet. I went for another walk. I cooked a simple dinner. I reminded myself that sometimes people only learn after the fire. And then they lost the first contract. I didn't find out from a dramatic announcement. I found out because a former colleague posted an open to work frame on their profile, and I messaged to ask if they were okay. They said their account was downsized because client A pulled their renewal. The official reason was that our side didn't meet the continuity requirements. The quiet reason was that the client had lost faith after a month of hiccups. They liked the product, but they liked sleeping more. I did the math in my head. That account was the biggest. If you added the base renewal and the planned expansions, it was a chunk that made you take a deep breath. The number sitting in the expansion pipeline column was a fantasy now. It was also the number the boss had used when he told the board we could do more with less. I got a call from a number that used to ring my desk phone. I let it go to voicemail. The transcription turned it into soup, but I could make out, "We'd like to discuss a short-term arrangement to help with a few deliverables." I didn't call back. I sent a short email to HR referencing their previous instruction about not engaging. I attached a screenshot of the clause they'd initialed. I didn't do it to be smug. I did it because staying on the ethical side matters, and I had no interest in being accused of stoking anything. 2 weeks later, client B followed. They didn't cancel everything. They did the thing where they trimmed usage and shifted a part of the workload to a competitor. They cited risk concerns in their note. People told me the boss denied it was related to my departure. He blamed the market and the client's internal politics. Maybe that made him feel better. It didn't change what the number looked like when you typed it into a cell. Options drop-down. Red. The third client was stubborn. They liked us. They liked me. They tried to make it work. I heard from someone that they asked the boss to bring me in for a 3-week overlap with a new person, paid at whatever rate I wanted. He said it wasn't necessary and that the team was fully capable. He also said he wouldn't set a precedent because other teams might ask for the same. They gave him a final list. Show us the audit evidence up to date, run a test change window with no impact, and produce a continuity plan that includes a named contact for each major function with a backup. The due date was soon, but not impossible. The team worked hard. I don't want to paint it like they were lazy. They weren't. They just didn't know the traps because they hadn't been there the night we dug them up and put flags around them. They ran the test. The test failed halfway through because a tool grabbed a lock it shouldn't have. Recoverable, but messy. The boss told the client it was fine because it wasn't production. The client said the test was a simulation of production and that the point was to prove the process, not the tool. The audit evidence had gaps where a screenshot with a certain timestamp should have been. The continuity plan was a single page with 3 names and support at company at the bottom. The client asked where the overlap documentation was. The boss said it wasn't required. The client quoted a clause from the annex and said politely that it was. When they left, my friend, who still had access to the billing system, messaged me the new number they were bracing for. If you added the first loss to the second and then dusted the third with a mix of downsizing and future expansion pushed to maybe, you landed right around 3 with a lot of zeros. The same boss who couldn't afford a transition to save 50 had managed to burn 60 times that without breaking a sweat. People asked me if I felt vindicated. The real answer is complicated. I felt angry for the coworkers who didn't do any of this but would pay for it. I felt embarrassed that my role had been explained so poorly that someone could think it was a nice to have. I felt relief that I wasn't the one on that 2A. Bridge, trying to rebuild a runbook from memory while a client counted seconds. I felt a small, ugly flicker of satisfaction when I remembered the initialed sheet in my folder labeled offboarding, because I knew the story would be told the right way if anyone tried to rewrite it. A couple days after the third client's meeting, I got a formal email through my personal account, this time not from HR but from a generic exec address. The subject line said, "Opportunity." The body said they wanted to bring me back on a short-term basis to stabilize critical processes and support key renewals. The rate they offered was more money than I'd made in a month at the old place, packed into a week. It looked tempting if you ignored the details and forgot all the noise. I read it twice and wrote a short reply. "Thank you for the offer. I will not be available for this engagement. For clarity, your previous instruction on my departure prohibited transition involvement, which I respected and will continue to respect. I wish the team well." No one could twist that into anything. The new job, meanwhile, was uneventful in the best way. My manager was someone who had been a hands-on engineer long enough to have racked and stacked a server by hand. He evaluated people on whether they made problems smaller or bigger. He didn't care what your slide looked like. He cared whether the plan would hold if someone fell sick. On my second week, he asked me to write down everything I considered dangerous knowledge for the accounts I would be taking. He wanted it in a shared space, with reminders to review quarterly. He said if a bus hit me, he wanted the client to send flowers, not lawyers. I laughed more than I had in months. The stories from my old place trickled in. They shuffled teams. They brought in a contractor who had to learn everything from scratch. They spun up task forces and steering committees. The boss started showing up less on the messaging platform. Then one morning his profile quietly changed to the neutral phrase everyone knows. People who had to leave wrote private notes to each other. No one wrote a public post about the why. They rarely do. A colleague who remained sent me a photo of an empty glass room with sticky notes everywhere. War room, they captioned it. If they had listened and paid for overlap, this room wouldn't exist. Then they added, "You were always nice to the teams, even when you had to say no. We miss that." I didn't send the photo to anyone. I closed the message and went back to my new set of dashboards. I started a fresh folder for audit evidence with sensible naming. I scheduled a quarterly calendar block titled Runbook Walkthrough and invited the person who would cover me if I got the flu. I put my notes where someone else could actually find them. I wrote down the scary sentence, "If this job fails, do X first, then Y, then test Z, or it will hang." I made sure the new person read it out loud to me. We clicked through the steps on a test system. They did fine. It felt like putting a railing on a staircase and wondering why you ever went without one. People sometimes think malicious compliance means getting revenge. In my experience, it's more boring than that. It's doing exactly what you're told, even when you know it's a bad idea, because the person giving the order has decided they want the risk. You don't sugarcoat it. You don't fix it in secret. You follow the instruction and you keep your receipts. Then, when the result hits, everyone who needs to learn the lesson learns it in the only language they understand. Numbers turning red. I still keep a copy of the offboarding instruction with the initials. It sits in a folder with other documents that mark odd little milestones. The time a client gave us an award for calm under pressure. The time our team shipped a change with 0 issues because we rehearsed it like a dance. The time someone in sales wrote in an email that I made a scary thing feel normal. The offboarding sheet goes in there too. It's not a trophy. It's a reminder that doing your job well sometimes looks like nothing special right up until the moment someone who doesn't understand it removes it to save 50. I didn't torch bridges. I didn't call the boss and crow. I didn't write a long post dragging anyone by name. I'm not pretending I'm above all that. I'm saying the cleanest way to win this kind of thing is to be boring. I saw the instruction. I followed it. The results followed too. A few months into my new job, I ran into someone from the old place at a conference. We did that awkward small talk where you both try to pretend you don't know more than you're allowed to say. They told me they were championing process now and trying to build overlap into every key role. They said leadership had approved budget for it this time. I didn't grin. I just said that sounded smart and asked if they were taking care of themselves. They said it had been rough, but the panic was cooling. On the way out, I got a notification on my phone from a public feed about a competitor winning an award for customer trust. It wasn't us or them. It was a third company that had quietly done the work. I thought about how boring their day probably was and felt a little jealous. Then I went back to my booth and answered a question from a customer about what would happen if our designated contact went on leave. I didn't have to think. I told them the plan, I showed them the document, and I opened my calendar and said, "Here's the date, we test it again." At home that night, I told my wife the short version, and then we ate leftovers and watched a show. Halfway through, my phone lit up with a number I didn't recognize. I ignored it. The voicemail transcription had a familiar shape, a rush of words and a hint of urgency. A polite ask to call back just this once. I put the phone face down. I wasn't angry. I just didn't want to rehearse a lesson that had already been taught. The truth is, my old boss wasn't evil. He was careless. He thought he was cutting fat when he was cutting tendons. He thought the checklist was the job when the job was what lived and breathed outside the checklist. He thought saving 50 in the short term would earn a pat on the head. Instead, the board had to sit through a slide that made everyone in the room shift in their chairs. Someone eventually had to say the number out loud. 3, with a lot of zeros, sounds bigger when you contrast it with 50. It becomes a story people tell each other after they've cleaned up the mess. A shorthand warning about the price of ignoring the boring work. If you've never sat in the quiet after a disaster and heard your own lack of documentation echo back at you, count yourself lucky. If you have, then you know why I wrote the scary sentence in my new run book as soon as I found it. Why I booked that quarterly review Why I introduced the backup person to the client even though it made the call go 10 minutes longer. You do those things so no one has to be a hero later. Heroes are fun in movies. In real life, heroes are tired people at kitchen tables with cold coffee and spouses who are good at convincing them to turn off their phones. Sometimes on Sundays, I still wake up at the time my old maintenance window started. Muscle memory is rude like that. I look at the clock and wait for a buzz that doesn't come. I get up, make a normal breakfast, and don't open a terminal. I don't check a status page. I read something that's not a run book. I think about the clients who used to call me and hope they're sleeping too. If you came to this story looking for a perfect punchline, I don't have one. The closest I can give you is a simple equation. A boss tried to save 50 by firing the person who knew how to keep 3 million steady. He told that person to stop helping immediately. That person complied. The result was predictable to anyone who lived inside the work, and mysterious to anyone who only saw the numbers in a column. There's a kind of revenge in that, I guess. It's not the dramatic kind. It's the kind where you follow instructions exactly and let gravity do the rest. Anyway, thank you for watching. See you again tomorrow.